In this video, we have to create a movie watchlist application, and we just have to use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The requirement says the user can enter a movie name, and when they press enter, the movie will be added to the list of movies below it. Each movie will also have a status, either it is watched or not. Default status will be to watch, and clicking on the button should change the status from to watch to watched. So when you take a look at the application on the right hand side here, you can see the movie name is Forrest Gump and it is to watch. But when you click on it, it changes to watched. But when you click on watched again, it goes back to watch. So this is what we have to create. So we have already created this kind of application earlier multiple times, right? So here in this video, I'm not going to start from scratch. I'm just going to walk you through of what this application looks like. So here we have a div with class container. We have h1, an input to take input from the user, and ul to have the list of all the movies. Now when you go on to JavaScript, you'll see we have selected input element and we have also selected root element. The root element is the ul element. And here we have the most important data on which our UI depends on all the time. That is all movies. That is an array of objects, and each object contains the information about individual movies. Each object has a property called name that contains the name of the movie and has a property called watched that defines whether that movie is watched or not. By default, it defaults to false. Next thing we should have a look at is create movie UI function. So we have a function called create movie UI that is responsible for creating UI whenever you're changing state or data. So whenever user is interacting with this application, like whether clicking on to watch, we are interacting with the application. So whenever you click on it, the first thing we need to do is to update our data, and after updating data, we have to call this function so it can create the latest UI. So first thing we are doing inside this function is to clear the inner HTML of root. Once we are done with that, we are looping over the data that we are getting, that is an array of objects. We are getting access to individual movies. We are creating a li, a button element, and we are putting label and button element inside li. And at last, we are just adding li into our root element. One another thing that we have done is we have said whenever movie is watched or the value of watched property is true, you have to display watched. Otherwise, you have to display to watch. We have added an event listener on button element. Whenever that happens, we have to call this function handle change. So let's see what handle change does. So when you take a look at handle change, it is getting access to event and it is taking out the ID from here. So how it is getting access to ID is because we have sent a property named ID, and that ID we are getting access to here. So once you get access to that, what you're doing, you're updating that specific ID's watch property to be not of that. So if it is false, it will become true. If it is true, it will become false. And at last, what we are doing, we are calling the function create movie UI because we have updated the data here. So earlier it was false, you change that to true. And because you change the data, you will be calling this function again here. One another thing that you're doing is adding an event listener on input element, and you'll get access to event object. The event object has a property called key code, and we are checking if that is 13, then you have to take the movie and push it inside the variable. And here we are changing the data, right? Whenever you change the data, you call create movie UI. And one another thing that we're also doing is we are calling this function create movie UI in the start because we want to create this UI. Now when you take a look at it here, if you want to add a new movie, you can just say Batman Begins and press enter. As soon as you do that, that movie got added into our data here. If you want to take a look at it, you can just take a look at that in our console. So we'll say all movies, and here you can see we have 3 movies. The last one is Batman Begins. As soon as we added a new movie, we called this function create movie UI, and that created the UI here. So when you click on to watch, you can see that the property is changing from to watch to watched, and when you click on watched, it changes to watch. So in this way, we completed this exercise, and in our future videos, we are going to change this application so it can start using React.